What does it mean when suddenly dozens of massive aerial refueling planes just appear, crisscrossing the Atlantic, seemingly though heading towards global hotspots?
Yeah, it's quite a sight.
We're talking about this unprecedented mass deployment of U.S. Air Force tankers. It sparked a lot of fear, a lot of speculation.
Understandably so.
Is the world on the brink of something big? Or is this maybe part of a deeper strategy that's unfolding?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. This is where we try to cut through all that noise and bring you the important nuggets of knowledge.
Glad to be back.
We're really glad you're joining us today. If you like what we do here, if you find it valuable, please do consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. It genuinely helps us grow the channel, keep bringing you this kind of content.
It really does make a difference.
So today, we are diving deep into this recent surge in military activity. We're going to unpack these immediate movements, look at the escalating tensions between Israel and Iran,
Which are definitely heating up.
examine some proposed strategies to maybe deter Iranian influence, and also, perhaps surprisingly, look at how Italy's military fits into all these complex global dynamics.
Italy's role is actually more interesting than many might think.
Our mission, as always, is to connect these dots, understand the broader shifts, and, see what it all means for you. Ready to jump in?
Let's do it. It's a really fascinating, complex web of events. You really can't grasp the current situation without looking at this remarkable show of air power first.
Okay, so picture this. June 15th, 2025, all of a sudden, flight tracking screens just light up, something nobody's seen before.
Right.
Dozens, maybe close to 50, huge U.S. Air Force refueling tankers, the KC-135Rs, the newer KC-46As, are all crossing the Atlantic at the same time.
Simultaneously. That's the key.
They're landing at places like Ramstein, Aviano, then turning south, basically dragging fighter jets towards the Middle East. Some even spotted near Suda Bay, in Sirleck. I mean, what kind of message does that send?
Well, it sends a very, very strong one. You had unnamed U.S. officials telling Reuters these tankers were deployed to give the Trump administration, quote, flexibility to act in the Middle East.
Flexibility, that sounds like code.
It does. Military experts pretty much universally saw this as potentially meaning more U.S. support for Israel, maybe even direct American strikes against Iran. And you mentioned those call signs, Goldie call signs for these Coronet flights. That's specific military talk. It means highly prioritized, usually rapid deployments of fighters over long distances, often precedes something significant.
So it's not just flexing muscles, as one observer put it.
No, absolutely not. It's like saying, this is serious and it's happening right now.
So, okay, you've got this massive, very public display of capability, but then former President Trump is at the G7 summit in Alberta saying, we're not involved in it. It's possible we could get involved, but we're not at this moment involved. How do those two things square up?
Well, it's a delicate diplomatic dance, isn't it? The words might be cautious, but the actions, they really speak volumes.
Right.
The U.S. already has, nearly 40,000 troops in the Middle East, plus air defense systems, warships, the whole setup.
And didn't the Pentagon just swap out bombers?
Exactly. They recently replaced B-2 stealth bombers with B-52s at a base in the Indo-Pacific. Now, B-52s, they're seen as ideal for Middle East operations. They can carry those large, bunker-busting munitions.
Which sounds tailor-made for potentially Iran's nuclear facilities.
Precisely. That's a significant upgrade in potential firepower, pointed right at the region.
And while all this aerial movement was happening, what was the actual conflict like on the ground, or I guess in the air, between Israel and Iran?
Still incredibly intense.
Yeah.
Israel has kept up its bombing of Iran. Iran claims over 200 fatalities, saying 90% were civilians. They even reported Iranian-state media facilities being hit, with casualties.
And Iran's response?
Predictably, they didn't just sit back. They launched what were described as apparently indiscriminate missile attacks on Israeli cities. Reports say at least 24 Israeli civilians killed, hundreds wounded.
Wow. And didn't Iranian state media make some pretty bold claims?
They did, claiming Tehran was preparing for largest and most intense missile attack in history on Israeli soil. But interestingly, there were also reports suggesting they signaled willingness to negotiate if the U.S. guaranteed no attack.
But Netanyahu wasn't buying it.
Not at all. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu basically dismissed it immediately as a ruse and vowed to keep bombing. So yeah, the tension remains extremely high. These military movements are definitely reflecting that reality.
So these tanker movements, they're a stark symptom of these rising tensions, but they also seem to point to a deeper issue, right? How do you even confront a threat as complex as Iran? And why has finding a coherent strategy seemed so, well, so difficult?
It's a massive challenge, partly because Iran is considered a doorstep nuclear nation.
What does that mean exactly? Doorstep.
It means they're incredibly close. They have enough uranium enriched to 60% purity for potentially 3 atomic bombs. But the really chilling part is the breakout time, the time needed to get to weapons-grade material. We might be talking weeks, maybe even just days.
Weeks or days, that's sobering.
It absolutely is. It's not just a regional worry anymore. It forces every major global power to rethink things.
And beyond the nuclear threat, their missile and drone programs are pretty sophisticated. We've seen them used directly against Israel, against U.S. bases in Iraq. How far does that influence really reach, though? Can you give an example of how their proxies have disrupted things globally?
Oh, definitely. Think back to September 2019. Houthi proxies attacked Saudi oil facilities, Crosshairs, and Abqaiq. That single event impacted 6% of the global oil supply.
6%, that's huge.
It was the largest daily supply disruption in history. It just shows Iran's ability to cause major global instability through its proxies without even needing direct Iranian military action.
And that's not even counting their direct support for groups like Hamas and Hezbollah.
Exactly. They funnel huge amounts of money, up to $100 million a year, to Palestinian groups like Hamas, maybe $700 million a year to Hezbollah. And these groups have carried out plots in more than 35 countries worldwide. It's a truly global network.
So, given this really complex, expanding threat, why was the Biden administration, according to Politico anyway, seen as maybe not having a coherent strategy? They called Iran an ink spill that has flooded his desk.
Well, it's a criticism that gained some traction. The perception was that the strategy focused too narrowly just on the nuclear program.
Right, like trying to revive the old deal.
Yeah, but it maybe didn't adequately address Iran's use of missiles, drones, those proxy forces, or the IRGC's operations. And then you saw the consequences, right? The October 7th Hamas attack, those 130-plus attacks on U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria shortly after.
And previous approaches, like Obama's JCPOA or Trump's maximum pressure, they had their own issues, but they were distinct strategies.
They were. And the effort to revive the JCPOA stalled, partly because there wasn't that multilateral consensus anymore. Russia and China started re-engaging with Iran more openly.
Which leads to Iran exporting, 1.4 million barrels of oil a day, mostly to China, and selling drones to Russia?
Exactly. That's a significant economic and military lifeline for Tehran, complicating any strategy aimed at isolation or pressure.
So if the recent approach wasn't quite cutting it, what does a good Iran strategy actually look like for the U.S.? What should it aim for?
Well, fundamentally, any successful strategy has to benefit the U.S. first and foremost. It needs to fit into the larger strategic picture where, let's be honest, the Indo-Pacific and Europe are the top priorities, and the Middle East is secondary, though still important.
So realistic goals.
Realistic goals, reasonable commitments. It should be restraint-based, ideally, and definitely emphasize multilateralism, working with allies. And crucially, we need perspective. Iran is a major threat to regional stability, absolutely, and to U.S. interests there. But is it an existential threat to the U.S. homeland? Probably not.
How far away are they again?
Over 5,000 miles. Their longest-range missiles are maybe 1,200 miles. So it's a regional power, not a direct threat to the continental U.S. in that sense.
That's a really important distinction to make. And while the U.S. might be energy independent now, those global oil shocks, they still hit us at the pump, don't they?
They absolutely do. So stability there still matters economically to everyone.
And you add in the context, support for Ukraine, support for Israel, potential friction with China. There's just not much appetite for expensive and extended foreign policy adventures, right?
Exactly. So any strategy has to be effective, yes, but also budget-friendly and sustainable in the long run.
Okay, so if that's the strategic landscape, the challenges, what's a potential concrete solution? This is where Integrated Air and Missile Defense, IAMD, comes up.
Right, IAMD. Sounds technical, but the concept is pretty straightforward. It's a comprehensive defensive approach, meaning integrating resources, platforms, sensors across multiple nations to defend against airborne threats. Think aircraft, missiles, drones. The idea is to create a unified shield. It's much stronger than what any single nation could manage alone.
Like a team effort for defense.
Exactly. NATO's system, Nat Namdes is probably the best example of this working successfully in Europe.
Okay, that makes sense. But how would you even start implementing something like that in the Middle East, given, the history of distrust between some of those countries?
That's the key challenge. You'd likely start by integrating and centralizing the detection capabilities first,
Just seeing the threats.
seeing them early. In air defense, especially against fast missiles, seconds really matter. Getting that early warning picture and sharing it quickly with everyone involved is critical.
And who would manage that?
U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, would almost certainly play the pivotal role. They already have the presence, the relationships, and now, critically, Israel is in CENTCOM's areas of responsibility. That gives CENTCOM a unique position to centralize information sharing, even with countries that don't officially talk to each other.
You mean because of the tensions between, say, Israel and some Arab states?
Precisely. CENTCOM's Combined Air Operations Center, the CAOC, down in Doha, Qatar, it's already a central hub. It costs about $60 million, running surveillance, reconnaissance, building that common operating picture.
And it could anonymize data. That sounds clever.
It is. The CAOC can process and share threat data without necessarily revealing the specific source. This allows nations to contribute and benefit while maintaining, let's say, plausible deniability back home about cooperating directly with certain neighbors, like Israel. It helps overcome a massive political hurdle.
Okay, so the tech helps bridge the political gap. What's the cost involved? What needs to happen?
The biggest step, technologically, is getting partners connected to the CAOC using something called Link 16.
Link 16.
Think of it as the secure, jam-resistant Wi-Fi for military forces. It lets aircraft, ships, ground units from different nations share real-time data seamlessly. It's what NATO uses.
So everyone needs that system.
Pretty much, yes. They'd need to buy and integrate Link 16 systems. The good news is many regional partners like the UAE, for instance, are already buying or operating Link 16. The UAE is getting over 100 terminals, so the groundwork is being laid. The main U.S. cost would be managing the network at the CAOC and supporting the connections.
What makes this seem feasible now, though, given that history of distrust we mentioned?
Several things are shifting. Yes, there's historical distrust, but you've also seen relations thaw. Egypt and Jordan normalized relations with Israel decades ago. More recently, you had the Abraham Accords, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan.
And the potential for Israeli-Saudi normalization is still out there?
Exactly. If that happens, it could really unlock deeper military cooperation. But perhaps the biggest driver is the shared threat, Iran. Their growing capabilities and assertiveness are pushing former rivals together. You saw this in exercises like Eagle Resolve 23, the U.S. training with Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Oman, specifically focusing on air and missile defense against Iranian threats.
And didn't we see this in action for real recently?
We absolutely did. That April 2024 Iranian attack on Israel was a watershed moment. You had a coalition, U.S., Jordan, Saudi Arabia, others actively defending Israel. Jordan didn't just ground airspace. Their pilots reportedly shot down Iranian drones. Saudi Arabia participated too. It showed that this kind of cooperation isn't just theoretical. It can happen, and it works.
Wow. And it's not like the region is starting from zero in terms of defense hardware, right?
Not at all. While the U.S. did remove some missile defense assets back in 2021, it still has Patriot batteries there. But more importantly, the regional countries themselves have bought and deployed significant capabilities.
Yeah.
Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE between them. They have something like 55 Patriot batteries, a couple of GAD batteries, and Saudi Arabia is waiting on 7 more FADs.
So there's a substantial existing base to build on.
A very substantial base.
Yeah.
This IAMD concept leverages those existing investments.
So for the U.S., what are the direct benefits?
It ticks a lot of boxes. It protects U.S. economic interests by stabilizing the region. It strengthens security objectives. It promotes burden sharing. Allies take on more responsibility for their own defense. It helps limit Iran's ability to coerce its neighbors. And crucially, it does all this at a relatively minimal sustainable cost to the U.S. taxpayer. It makes strategic sense.
Okay, so we've looked at how shared threats are kind of forcing new defense cooperation in the Middle East, this whole IAMD idea. But what does this changing landscape mean for, say, traditional European allies? Like Italy. They're a key NATO member, but now they seem to be looking much further afield, even to the Indo-Pacific. How does that fit in?
That's a really important piece of the puzzle. Italy clearly recognizes the huge economic and demographic weight of the Indo-Pacific. Over half the world's population and output is there.
And they're sending ships out there.
Quite actively. In 2023, their ship, Idates Morosini visited 19 ports, did multinational exercises. In 2024, the Idas Montecuccoli was involved in major exercises like Rim of the Pacific. Their aircraft carrier, the Cavour, even got its F-35B jets initially certified for operations out there. They have another ship, the Antonio Marcellia, deploying in 2025.
So a consistent naval presence. What about other areas?
Defense industry cooperation is growing too. They have the Global Combat Air Program with Japan and the UK to develop a next-gen fighter. They're deepening ties with Malaysia, Indonesia. There were even rumors about selling their older carrier, the Garibaldi, to Indonesia.
And their Air Force is involved, too.
Yes, the Aeronautica Militaire. They did this Indo-Pacific jump mission in 2024, sending F-35A stealth fighters to Japan for exercises. They have their own advanced drones like the MQ-9A Reapers, their own airborne early warning planes, the Gulfstream E-550As. Italy actually has one of only 2 F-35 assembly plants outside the U.S., in Cameri.
So they have some serious high-tech capabilities. Navy sounds capable, too.
Very capable Navy. Modern frigates, helicopter landing ships, LHDs. They have 2 aircraft carriers now, technically, plus a small but modern submarine fleet with these new U-212s coming online. They have significant expeditionary warfare capabilities for a European nation.
But can they sustain this kind of global reach? That sounds expensive and demanding.
That's the critical question. The sources we looked at suggest Italy needs to follow 3 key principles to make this sustainable and avoid overstretching themselves.
Yeah, hey, what's the first one?
First, don't confuse tactics for strategy. Their Indo-Pacific engagement needs to be about securing Italy's long-term relevance in global affairs, not just using deployments for short-term diplomatic bargaining chips. And they need to diversify partners beyond just the U.S., South Korea, Japan, looking at India, Indonesia, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia.
Makes sense. Build broader relationships. What's number 2?
Second, don't overstretch military capabilities. Italy's military is already, surprisingly, one of NATO's most heavily deployed forces. They operate in Africa, Asia, the Arctic, the Middle East, the Balkans, Eastern Europe.
Wow, they're busy.
They are. But Italy lags behind major allies in overall defense spending as a percentage of GDP. And a large chunk of their budget goes to personnel costs, which limits funds for new equipment, maintenance, training. This creates what the analysis calls a risky security trade-off, especially with instability growing closer to home in the Mediterranean and, questions about the U.S. commitment to European security.
Right, they can't be everywhere at once if the funding isn't keeping pace. And the third principle?
Third, don't take a faux-on-OP-centric approach. Freedom of navigation operations are fine, but Italy should probably focus more on a comprehensive security approach, emphasizing capacity building with partners.
Meaning what? Training.
Exactly. Italy has valuable experience from training and advising missions in places like Afghanistan and Iraq. They also have these unique gendarmerie-style forces, the Carabinieri, the Guardia di Finanza, financial police, the Guardia Costiera, Coast Guard, even the Polizia Postale, cyber police. These forces could offer really valuable training and assistance to partner nations, building stability in different ways.
That's an interesting angle, using their specific strengths. So they have the potential, the hardware. What actually holds Italy back from having, say, the most capable armed forces in all of Europe?
Several underlying factors seem to be at play. One is maybe a lack of perceived need. As a NATO member, surrounded by allies, the main perceived risk has often been Mediterranean instability, which often translates politically into focusing on immigrant patrols rather than high-end warfare capability.
Okay, so the threat perception is different.
Different, yeah. Then there's the economy. Italy's real GDP is basically where it was back in 2006. Economic stagnation makes big defense investments harder. And demographics, half the population is over 46 years old. That impacts recruitment pools and the tax base.
And politics.
Politics plays a role. The military maybe isn't as culturally loved or prioritized as it is in, say, the U.S. There's also a pacifist article in their constitution, Article 11, which rejects war as an instrument of aggression. Now, they get around it by calling deployments peace missions, but it still influences the political discourse.
So economic limits, demographics, political culture.
And some internal military structural issues, too. Apparently things like rigid career paths for officers, difficulties in promoting enlisted personnel. All these things add up to limit their ability to fully maximize the potential of the capabilities they do have.
Wow. Okay, this has been quite a journey, a real deep dive into some major global shifts. We kick things off with that dramatic sight, those U.S. tankers crossing the Atlantic, a clear signal amid the rising Israel-Iran tensions.
Yeah, a very visible symptom of a deeper conflict. We then unpack the Iranian threat itself. It's not just one thing, is it? It's nuclear ambitions, advanced missiles and drones, and this wide-reaching network of proxy forces across the region and beyond. A really complex challenge.
Which requires a robust strategy. And that led us to talk about integrated air and missile defense, IAMD, as a potential cornerstone for a solution in the Middle East. It's defensive, it leverages existing systems, it encourages cooperation.
And importantly, we saw it actually work in practice during that April 2024 attack, which gives the concept real credibility.
Definitely. And finally, we looked at how a traditional European power like Italy is trying to navigate this new world, expanding its reach into the Indo-Pacific, showcasing impressive capabilities, but also facing some real challenges in making that global role sustainable long-term.
Highlighting that balancing act between ambition, capability, and resources that many nations are facing now.
So wrapping this all up, what's the big takeaway? Maybe something for you, our listener, to think about. As we see the U.S. and its partners pushing for more integrated defenses like IAMD to counter these growing threats, and countries like Italy stretching their influence far beyond traditional areas, are we actually witnessing the quiet birth of a new kind of global security architecture?
That's interesting.
One that's maybe less about old-style fixed alliances and more about highly interoperable, flexible capabilities that kind of blur geographical lines and maybe redefine what collective defense even means in the 21st century.
That's a really provocative thought, a shift from fixed alliances to more flexible, capability-based coalitions, perhaps. Definitely something to keep an eye on.
Indeed. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us for another deep dive. We really hope this discussion has given you a clearer picture of these incredibly important and fast-moving global dynamics.
Thanks for listening, everyone.